In the heavy rain, on a deserted street in Tennessee, a young mother stood silently among the soaking wet boxes, clothes, books, and even her son's worn-out teddy bear scattered across the freezing sidewalk. Beside her, a boy barely 7 years old huddled in a faded hoodie, his face streaked with rain, or perhaps tears. No one could tell for sure. Passers-by averted their eyes. No one wanted to get involved in a tragedy that wasn't their own. But inside an old pickup truck driving by, a service dog suddenly jumped up, barking loudly and clawing at the window, an unusual act that made the veteran behind the wheel slam on the brakes in the pouring rain. He didn't know why Max, his loyal companion, reacted so fiercely. But just minutes later, stepping out of that truck led him into a story no one could have predicted. A family on the verge of losing everything. A long-forgotten promise made on the battlefield. And a dog. Not just a four-legged friend, but a guardian of memory. A guide toward justice. The story began with a bark in the rain. But it ended with something far deeper. A promise kept, with the heart. Former Sergeant Jack Miller, 39, lived alone in a small wooden cabin tucked away in the misty hills of southeastern Kentucky. Since leaving the service, he had withdrawn from the noisy world outside, avoiding pitying glances and questions that, however innocent, risked reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Jack's life had been reduced to simple routines: chopping wood, fishing, and long, quiet evenings by the fire with Max, the dog he adopted from a veteran service center nearly 5 years ago. But Max wasn't just a pet. He didn't just follow commands, he understood silence. He didn't just guard the door, he sensed the nightmares that came in the dark. A Malinois husky mix, Max carried the sharp instincts of a warrior and the soothing presence of a healer. But more than that, between Jack and Max, there was no master-servant bond. There was only the quiet companionship of two soldiers, both of whom had lost more than words could ever capture. They met after the war, each bearing wounds no one could see. Jack, with the silence of a survivor, is constantly watching his memories. Max, with eyes so alert, it felt like he had seen things no human dared to name. There were nights Jack couldn't sleep. He would jolt awake, chest heaving, shirt drenched in sweat. And Max was always there, not asking, not judging, just gently resting his soft, fur-covered head on Jack's leg. A quiet reminder. You're still here. And you're not alone. It wasn't training. It was instinct. The soul of someone who'd been through it too. A soldier who didn't speak much, but always knew when the heart next to him was breaking. Max wasn't just the reason Jack stepped out of that cabin that day. He was the voice of loyalty. The echo of a promise Jack had buried long ago. Besides the brothers he once called family, the old pickup truck trudged along the slippery hillside road, the downpour hammering the windshield like it was trying to erase the world outside. Jack didn't pay it much mind. To him, this trip into the town of Maryville to pick up more fuel was just a routine, something to get done before returning to his familiar silence. But Max was different. Usually curled up quietly on the passenger seat, Max suddenly sprang up, ears perked, his body tense. A low rumble came from his chest, not quite a bark, but more of a restrained warning. He leaned forward, planting both front paws on the dashboard, his glowing eyes fixed on something out in the gray curtain of rain. Jack frowned. He knew Max, and when Max reacted like this, it meant something was wrong, something important. Trusting his comrade's instincts, Jack eased off the gas and followed Max's gaze. Then he saw them. A woman stood frozen beside a pile of belongings carelessly dumped on the roadside. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her body, as she clutched a small boy shivering in her arms. Her face was pale, like every bit of hope had been swept away by the storm. A heavy-set man, likely the landlord, was yelling, pointing, rage boiling on his face. But it was the boy's eyes that stopped Jack cold. It wasn't fear, it was despair. The kind Jack had seen in the mirror every morning since the war. Max no longer barked. He turned his head to Jack, his look held no urgency. No blame, only a quiet command, absolute, unspoken. And Jack understood. This trip was no longer about fuel. It was a mission, delivered not in words, but through the heart of a four-legged friend who had never turned away from pain. His loyal companion had assigned him a duty. Jack slammed the brakes and pulled over. He leapt out, The icy rain couldn't cool the fire rising in his chest. He walked straight toward the landlord, the presence of a soldier in his stance silencing the man instantly. "That's enough," Jack said, his voice low but firm, ringing with quiet authority. Then he turned to the woman and her child. "You and your son are coming with me." It wasn't a request. It was an order given in response to a signal from a loyal brother-in-arms with 4 legs and an unshakable heart. The small hilltop cabin, once a fortress of silence, was now filled with the soft crackle of firewood in the stove and the hesitant breaths of 3 strangers sharing a fragile stillness. Amanda sat quietly on an old wooden chair, her soaked clothes replaced by a coarse wool sweater Jack had dug out from a dusty drawer. Little Lucas, after some shy fidgeting, had drifted off on the worn-out couch, curled tightly beneath a thick fur blanket. Max lay still by the fire, his damp fur carrying traces of earth and rain. But soon, he rose, not to wander or patrol as he often did, but to walk deliberately, quietly, straight toward Amanda. Startled, she instinctively pulled her hands back. But Max showed no signs of threat. Instead, he lowered his head and gently placed his chin into her open palm, a gesture that felt both strangely familiar and inexplicably profound. Jack froze. Max was a service dog, disciplined, trained never to show affection toward strangers without reason. But that gesture, it was unmistakable. You've done that before," Jack muttered, eyes fixed on Max. Slowly, he stepped forward and asked softly, "What's your name?" "Amanda," she answered quietly. "Amanda Harper." The name hit like lightning. Jack could hardly breathe. Harper. The same last name as Ben Harper, his fallen comrade from Kandahar. The one who used to grin around the barracks, telling stories about a puppy he trained with a special trick, a little head tilt. Then resting his chin in someone's hand, waiting silently for comfort. Jack stood frozen, eyes shifting from Max to Amanda, then to the faded photo sitting on the mantel above the stove. A photo of Ben, beaming in uniform. Ben, Jack's voice cracked. He taught a dog to do that, exactly that. And in that moment, all the silent pieces inside Jack's heart, long buried, long still, finally began to move again. Max never left Amanda's side. After resting his chin in her palm like a quiet greeting from the past, he didn't return to his usual spot by the fire. Instead, he gently pressed his head against her chest, eyes half closed, breathing steadily, as if he had finally found something long lost. Amanda hesitated, then slowly placed her hand on Max's head. At first, her touch was stiff, unsure, but within seconds, her fingers moved gently, silently stroking the soft gray and white fur. "Ben," she whispered. Jack sat quietly on the other side of the room, watching the 2 forms in front of him, like shadows of something once familiar. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Max had already spoken, not with noise, but with presence. Amanda began to speak. After the funeral, everything faded into a fog of gray. The endless paperwork, the pitying glances, the long nights without sleep as Lucas cried out for his father in his dreams. And then came Jason, her smooth-talking cousin. "He told me not to worry," she said, voice trembling, said he'd help manage everything, Ben's insurance, the savings. Her words cracked. I believed him, because he was family. Her voice faltered. Her hands tightened slightly around Max's neck, as if clinging to the last warm thing left in her world. "I didn't dare reach out to you, to Ben's brothers in arms," she choked out. "How could I tell you that? I lost everything he gave his life for? He died so Lucas could have a future. And I let a conman steal it all." Max didn't move. He only nestled deeper into Amanda's lap, no judgment, no withdrawal, as if his loyal heart had chosen to absorb the pain Ben could no longer heal. And it was that gentle silence, Max's unshakable presence, that finally gave Amanda the strength to face herself. In that quiet moment, between the steady rhythm of rain on the wooden roof and the soft crackling of fire, Jack looked at the woman crying into the fur of his dog and realized the wall he had built around himself all these years was no longer standing. He once believed he had withdrawn from the world because of the past. But the truth was, he had been hiding from a promise. A promise whispered under moonlight on the front lines when Ben, his friend, his brother in arms, looked at him for the last time and said, "If I don't make it back, Make sure my family isn't left behind." Jack had kept that promise in the most passive way possible, through guilt. Through recurring dreams. Through a reclusive life that felt like penance for someone else's sacrifice. But Max, it was Max, who made him see the truth. Loyalty isn't a burden. It's an action. Jack stood up, his voice low but firm. "This won't end here. Amanda, I know some people. People who owe Ben a debt, just like I do." Amanda looked up through her tears. Startled, then nodded silently. Jack stepped out onto the porch. His gaze fixed on the misty hills beyond, once the boundary between memory and the present. But this time, he didn't feel only sorrow. He felt purpose, a reason to move forward. Not just as a survivor, but as a soldier once again, on a mission that still wasn't finished. 1 week after that fateful encounter, Jack spent hours on the phone, reconnecting with old friends from his unit. And as if fate had already drawn the path, he finally reached Nancy Green, a former Navy officer, now a lawyer specializing in legal aid for veterans and their families. After hearing Jack's story, Nancy didn't hesitate. "I'll take the case, but hear me, Jack. Without the original contract or any financial records, it's her word against her cousin's. That won't hold in court. We need evidence, black and white." Amanda's flickering hope dimmed once more. "I'm pretty sure it's all gone, from the last move," she whispered. Everything was left behind in the old storage unit. But Jack didn't give up. He, Amanda, and a fellow veteran named Cole drove out to a small storage facility on the outskirts of Knoxville. One that still held a few boxes Amanda had hastily stashed away. The unit was cold, smelled of mildew, and the lights were flickering overhead. They began digging old books, children's clothes, cracked picture frames, torn wrapping paper. Each opened box was another blow to their hope. Just as they were about to give up, Cole gently pulled out a crushed cardboard box from the far corner, its bottom damp, sealed with faded silver tape. Amanda sighed, shaking her head. "That's just old junk, we can throw it out." But Max, who had been silently observing the search from the start, suddenly growled. Not playful, not a warning. It was sharp, deliberate. He darted forward, blocked the box with his body, pressed his nose to the seam of the tape, nudged it with his snout, then turned to Jack, eyes gleaming with unmistakable certainty. "Wait," Jack said sharply. He dropped to his knees, dragged the box out, and tore open the tape. Underneath some old baby items and a worn photo album, lay a thick manila envelope. Inside, copies of financial contracts, bank statements, signatures, everything Nancy had asked for. Amanda covered her mouth as tears welled up uncontrollably. She whispered, almost to herself, How did Max know?" Jack didn't answer. He simply looked at Max, now sitting tall, tongue slightly out, eyes razor sharp, and smiled quietly. Max wasn't just a loyal companion. He was a torchbearer of justice, guided by a loyalty that never faltered for those he loved. The hearing took place at the Knox County Courthouse on a crisp Monday morning. Outside, no one recognized the woman walking in with such steady eyes as the same mother who had once stood helpless in the rain just weeks earlier. Amanda Harper was no longer alone. Beside her stood Jack, clad in his old military jacket, his face calm but his eyes sharp, just like the day he marched into war. And at her other side, Nancy Green, the veteran-turned attorney, with a voice as firm as her resolve, ready to command the courtroom with unshakable clarity and precision. Jason, the cousin who had deceived Amanda, sat on the other side of the room. His initial confidence faded fast as Nancy laid out the irrefutable evidence: investment contracts, transfer letters, matched signatures, all retrieved from the manila envelope Max had uncovered like a messenger of justice. Nancy rose to address the judge, her voice clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, this isn't a financial misunderstanding. This is the calculated exploitation of a grieving widow, at her most vulnerable. But today, she is no longer a victim." It didn't take long for the verdict to come down. Amanda was awarded the majority of her late husband's insurance funds. Not just money, but the right to rebuild her life. As she left the courthouse, Amanda held Lucas's hand tightly, her eyes shining with gratitude, not just for Nancy, or the justice system, but for the quiet soldier who had kept a fallen brother's promise. And at her feet, Max strode proudly, head held high, as if he, too, Understood. Justice had been served. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the window of Amanda's new apartment, casting a golden glow across the wooden floor, like a silent blessing. The last of the moving boxes had been unpacked. Ben's photo now rested in a place of honor on the living room shelf, right beside a crayon drawing from Lucas titled, Superhero Max. Laughter filled the room. Lucas, no longer the timid boy huddled in the rain, was rolling across the rug with Max. The once silent warrior of a dog now bounded like a playful pup, letting Lucas bury his face in his thick fur, tug gently at his ears, and giggle until his sides hurt. Amanda stood in the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, smiling softly at the sight. "He's the guest of honor here. Always," she said to Jack, her voice light as the breeze. Jack didn't answer right away. He simply watched Max, Amanda, Lucas, and finally, his eyes settled on the photo of his old friend. The image no longer weighed like a memory. It shimmered like a legacy. He stepped toward the window, hand resting gently on the wooden frame. The wind drifted in, carrying the scent of fresh grass and something else, peace. "Ben," he whispered, "you weren't forgotten. I didn't keep the promise alone. Max kept it with me. And you know what? You left behind a family that's stronger than you ever imagined." The promise once made beneath a war-torn sky, buried beneath years of silence and loss, had finally been fulfilled. Not by one soldier, but by two warriors, one man, and one loyal heart, that knew how to hear the things never spoken. Some promises are kept through blood, others through tears, and sometimes, through the quiet loyalty of a friend who cannot speak. Max wasn't just a dog. He was the bridge, between past and present, between unnamed sorrow and the courage to heal it. The story of Jack and Max reminds us, justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes from love, from loyalty, from a quiet kindness that never goes out. In life, what we need isn't always someone who speaks well, but someone who listens deeply. Through a glance, a gesture, or a bark at just the right moment. That someone might be a best friend, a life partner, or a four-legged soul, who understands you better than anyone ever could. Sometimes, the greatest thing you can do for someone is not leave, even when they feel they don't deserve to stay. If Max's story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who still believes in quiet heroes.